started.
How are you guys enjoying it? Remember to record your
Even
voice.
in a growing economy, the competition for economic development projects is getting steeper and steeper and more competitive. That's why we all need, all of us who are interested in growing our counties, and I assume you are or you wouldn't be in this room, we all need to know the most effective techniques, the most effective strategies, and that's what we're here to learn today. We're honored and pleased to have Mr. Stephen Moret speak to us. He is currently the president and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. He comes to us by way of Louisiana with a long history in economic development. He was CEO of the Baton Rouge Chamber of Commerce, a consultant for Harvard Business School, assistant chancellor at LSU, secretary of economic development in Louisiana, where he turned Louisiana's department into one of the top ED departments in the country, president and CEO of the LSU Foundation, where he helped to set up the largest capital campaign in state history. Without further ado, turn it over to Steve.
Good morning. Thank you for that nice introduction. Great to be with all of you again. I want to thank VACO and all of Virginia's counties for the great welcome you guys have given me over the last year and a half or so that I've been back here in Virginia. So many dear friends that I've made, from Mark Taylor to Liz Povard to others across the Commonwealth. So great to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the positives of Virginia that you know, some of the challenges that you may or may not know, and most importantly, how we can go forward to create more economic opportunity across the Commonwealth. Let's start with the positives. The biggest positive story for the Commonwealth is about talent and about education. We're top 10 in the country in educational attainment, in fact, roughly in the top 5. We're top 10 for higher education. In fact, we're often ranked as the best or second best state public higher education system in America. We're top 10 for public schools. Some of the best public schools in the country right here in the Commonwealth. All across Virginia, we have attractive small sites for development. And this is one of the things that's helped us to attract a variety of manufacturing and distribution projects to Virginia. We've got this great location, mid-Atlantic, roughly at the centroid of the East Coast population and talent network, natural deep water port, and on the back door of Washington, D.C. One of the advantages that we offer is a stable and relatively low tax climate, including state and local tax burdens for existing firms in Virginia. We've also got overall relatively exceptional infrastructure with the Port of Virginia, with our incredible airports, with our spaceport on the Eastern Shore. One of the things that blows me away about the Commonwealth every time I visit a different part of the Commonwealth is the diversity and quality of employers that are here, making world-class products, delivering world-class services in every industry sector imaginable. It's really amazing. And then finally, we've got dozens of federal laboratories, I think roughly second highest in the country. So if you put all those things together, you would think that Virginia would be at the top of the National Business Climate Rankings and sort of setting national records for growth. We once were, but we haven't been there for quite some time, in fact, over a decade. And largely, the reasons are the things on the right-hand side of the page. So I hit the strengths on the left-hand side very quickly, really an incredible range of strengths for Virginia. But we also have some weaknesses, and those weaknesses are holding us back in a significant way. First of all, I talked about talent. We've got this very educated population and great educational institutions, but we're generally not considered a national leader when it comes to state workforce development programs. We're also not producing nearly enough technology graduates in computer science and other fields to be able to meet the talent needs out there. I mentioned we've got attractive small sites across Virginia. We really do. We don't have nearly enough of, in our counties, as medium and larger size sites. The most common reason that Virginia loses a manufacturing project for which we're considered is that another state has a better prepared site available more quickly than we do. And that happens all the time. Billions and billions and billions of dollars. Just last year, for example, the Toyota Mazda project, which went to Alabama, $1.6 billion investment. Imagine that on your tax rolls. 1.6 billion capital investment, 4,000 jobs. Virginia essentially was eliminated at the outset because we didn't have a site that was fully prepared to meet their needs. So that's a big, big issue that we face. Partly because of the topography and so forth across Virginia. I mentioned we have low tax burdens for existing firms. One of the quirks of Virginia's tax structure is we have a relatively high tax burden for new firms and for expansions of firms in Virginia. I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit, but that's a unique issue that we face. While our infrastructure in general is quite strong, we've had issues with the metro, which of course are getting addressed, with congestion challenges in Northern Virginia. More to the point for our counties, not enough 4-lane roads in areas that would really be prime for development if they had them. And finally, probably our biggest challenge, not just in Northern Virginia, but really for Virginia as a whole, is our over-reliance on the federal government for our economic growth, both directly and indirectly. Why does that impact parts of the state that are outside Northern Virginia? It's because often our economy statewide is so supported by what's going on with the federal government that there's not enough energy and focus placed on rural Virginia and the smaller metros in the Commonwealth. So that's a real issue. So when you put all these things together, the strengths are big, but the weaknesses are real as well. I want to give you a sense of how that's impacted us over the last few years. We've seen a significant slowdown in growth in the wake of sequestration. It has been getting better. If I were to show you this slide a year ago, these numbers would typically be in the 40s, but our last 5 years for growth, we've been 30th in employment growth, 30th among the states, I should say, 39th in gross state product, 38th in median earned income. Not nearly the growth we'd like to see, and of course that also translates into what you see in local government tax revenues. Our growth has been so slow that we've experienced, really for the first time in a very, very long time, net population, domestic population outmigration, more people moving out of Virginia to other states than into Virginia from other states. The people that are moving overwhelmingly are young individuals that have a bachelor's degree or higher. We have more people moving out of Virginia each year with a college degree than we're producing college degrees in Virginia, so that's a real issue. The other thing that you're certainly well familiar with in our counties is that Virginia's growth has been very uneven. This particular picture is just looking at the last decade and looking at the regional level, so not the locality level, but even at the regional level, you can see there are certain parts of Virginia that experience growth while other parts decline. And one of the things that we care about an awful lot at VDP these days is trying to get all of the state into a green category, at least at the regional level. I'll talk more about that in a minute. 10 years ago, we were regularly viewed as the best state for business in America, #1 in Forbes, #1 in CNBC, typically in the top 3 in various rankings. But what happened since then is that we've fallen quite dramatically, although we are making our way back. Virginia today ranks lower in every national state business climate than we did 10 years ago. But as you can see, we kind of bottomed out in 2015 and we are making our way back. We have seen steady improvement the last few years. And one of the things we're really focused on is how do we get back to the top, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. One of the things that's contributed to that decline is that Virginia a few years ago became one of the only states in America that did not market itself as a great place for business investment. We've done a wonderful job marketing Virginia for tourism for decades. A few years ago, we actually stopped marketing Virginia as a great place for business, and we kind of fell off the radar. You can see here, I don't know if I have a pointer. Yeah, so Virginia today, we rank between 11 and 15 on rankings that are based purely on perceptions of business executives and top site consultants. And that's not so bad, except that our top competitors are all typically clustered toward the top. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and so forth. So that's really something we've got to address. I'm not going to go into this one in detail, but if you ask site consultants to rate us in all these different dimensions, what you find again is that very often, in fact nearly in every case, we rank well behind our top competitors. You see North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, others that very often rank 5 to 10 or 15 places ahead of the Commonwealth. So this is a real issue. It's not so much that Virginia has gotten worse in any way, it's that these other places have really caught up with us and have been more aggressive over the last few years. By the way, most of these are pretty accurate in terms of where they place us. Some of this is a perception issue, but a lot of it is real. I mentioned shovel-ready sites. We're not in the top 10 there. Top competitors, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all ahead of us. Alabama, I mentioned earlier. These are real issues that face us because our competition typically is with these other southern states, So if they are regularly viewed as better than us in each of these categories, it's really had a negative impact. If you were to look at North Carolina the last few years, you'd see they attracted much more manufacturing activity and all the local property tax revenues that go with that as a result of these things. So what's caused us to fall overall? It's really three big reasons. One is business costs. Again, not so much that they got worse. In this case, more sophisticated ways of measuring those costs came out that looked at the differences in state and local taxation for new or expansion operations as compared to existing firms. Virginia is one of the few states where those two things are really different. Second, our slowdown in growth and the expectations of future growth, largely tied to sequestration. And third, as we stopped marketing Virginia for business, we saw the perception of Virginia kind of fade a little bit. So those are the big three. The other thing we think about is where's our growth going for the future? I haven't updated this slide recently. It's gotten a little bit better, but a year ago we were forecast to grow 28th in the country, so below average in terms of a rank. To get back to the top 10, we need to add somewhere between 20 and 40,000 jobs per year over and above what we're currently expected to grow. And again, you see all of this in your tax revenues at the local level, at least on average. So that's a real issue. So as we got together last year with our state leaders, with business leaders, with our local and regional economic development folks, with local officials like you all, we developed a new strategic plan for the future economic development of Virginia. And that plan centers on 5, to me, exciting and transformational goals. The first one is to position Virginia to once again be one of the top growth states in the country, growth in both job or employment growth, but also growth in median earned income or the quality of those jobs. Second, and I think relevant in particular for our counties, is that we have a goal now to position every region of Virginia to grow. They're not all going to grow at the same rate, but we're putting a tremendous amount of focus on how do we enable every region of the Commonwealth to experience growth on a consistent basis. And we're going to be measuring that very consistently as we go forward. Third, we want our position as a great business climate to get back to the top, both in perception and reality. We're excited that Governor Northam talks about this in almost every speech he gives. Fourth, to be able to accomplish all those things, we want to reestablish VDP as really America's premier state economic development organization in terms of the impact and the effectiveness of what we do. And finally, number 5, we want to do all that with a great spirit of coordination and alignment with our local and regional partners, and state partners for that matter. So 5 simple but transformational goals. This is really the central focus of my work at VDP. And what we've done is laid out a detailed strategic plan for what it would actually take to accomplish those things. Some of these things are things that we can accomplish with our own efforts. Others would require action of the General Assembly and others. And I'm going to spend the remainder of my time, a few minutes here, just giving you a broad sketch of what it would take to accomplish these 5 goals. There are 3 different types of strategies involved. One is improving our economic competitiveness. That's actually the most important one. Second is cultivating our top target growth sectors across Virginia. And third is enhancing VDP's capabilities. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about each of those. The most important one by far is improving our economic competitiveness. I mentioned, for example, that we have a great story to tell and talent, but we need to do more to strengthen our human capital development engine. I'll say more about what that means in a minute. We've got to develop more project-ready sites. Our counties are losing projects every year simply because other places are more prepared than we are, over and over and over again. Billions and billions of dollars of capital investment every year. We've got to catch up. We're behind North Carolina, we're behind South Carolina, we're behind Georgia, we're behind Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama. In fact, almost every state in the South is doing this considerably better than us. Largely it's a question of investment. Third is improving our state, regional, local economic competitiveness. The tax issues are going to be a little bit of that. Fourth, it's time for us to have ubiquitous broadband in the Commonwealth of Virginia. If we're going to achieve growth in every locality and every county across the Commonwealth, we need to have ubiquitous or at least near ubiquitous broadband, and we need to be one of the first states to do that. And I think this administration is going to make a big impact in getting us there. And finally, there's a whole set of special things that we need to do to help our rural areas to grow. And again, I'm going to touch on a few of these in a little bit more detail. I'm sorry for the number of words on this slide, but when you think about human capital development, I just want to hit on 2 particular things. One, I mentioned that we're often not considered a leader when it comes to custom workforce programs. We are launching, with Governor Northam's support and the General Assembly, a new world-class customized workforce recruitment and training program that we'll be implementing in collaboration with the Virginia Community College system. You'll see this start to ramp up in the spring. So we're getting we're getting that addressed pretty quickly. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that despite the fact that we're doing really well in terms of the quality of education in Virginia, we're not producing nearly enough of some of the key fields that we really need more of. Think about computer science and engineering at the four-year level. Think about skilled trades at the sub-baccalaureate level. These two things here, with expanding the Fast Forward program and then doing more to really invest in those critical fields, they're absolutely essential to our future. Our growth as a state is being constrained by the lack of talent supply. Again, the quality is great, we're just not producing enough. There's a few other things, I'm not going to hit on those in the interest of time. I wanted to say just a minute about the competitiveness issues I talked about. I mentioned tax. Let me see if I can describe for you what's going on. So a few years ago, the Tax Foundation and KPMG, this was I think 2012, published a landmark study that for the first time they looked at not just sort of tax types and tax rates, which Virginia does relatively well in. They looked at also deductions, credits, exemptions, by right aspects of the tax code and how that impacts different types of businesses, from capital-intensive manufacturers, labor-intensive manufacturers, headquarters, R&D facilities, and so forth. And they compared those against not just the mature firms that have been here for a while, but also the new firms. And what these numbers represent is our rank nationally for each of those types of scenarios, if you will, where a rank of 1 would mean we have the lowest state and local tax burdens in the country. A rank of 50 would mean we have the highest. And what you can see is that for new projects, and this includes expansions of existing firms, our average is 35th in the country. So we're a higher tax state than average for new firms. On the other hand, for mature firms where no temporary exemptions or credits will apply, we're below average tax burden. So we have a delta of about 18 places between how we treat new companies versus how we treat existing firms in Virginia. The main reason for the difference, by the way, is that Virginia has very few by right credits or exemptions or incentives for investment or for job creation in the Commonwealth. That's the reason. But what happened was this came out in 2012, most recently in 2015. They published it every few years. And it got incorporated into Forbes and CNBC site selection, Polina, and other rankings. And in every case, it caused our position to fall. This has meant fewer leads for the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's really negatively impacted the perception of the Commonwealth. Now, we have identified a number of errors that they made. In fact, Baco helped us with that they're going to fix when they publish this again. But even after the corrections, we still have room for improvement. This particular slide looks at the exact same ranking and the exact same categories. This column here from 2015 is the same as the one I just showed you. The corrections we identified would improve our position about 9 spots, but we'd still be right at roughly the national average. So one of the areas we think would be helpful for Virginia to think about is how can we be more competitive for new investments or expansions of existing companies in the Commonwealth, but do that in a way that doesn't have any negative impact on local government revenues. We think the state is part of the answer, the localities may be part of the answer as well. I'm happy to talk more about that if you like. Let me shift gears. I mentioned the second big thing was growing our particular target growth sectors. There are 5 big ones: strengthening our leadership position in technology, building on our transportation and logistics opportunities with the Port of Virginia and other related operations. Manufacturing, which is very important to many of our localities. This is not going to be a big growth driver overall, but it's going to be very important for our rural regions and our small metro areas. We're going to be putting a lot of energy into that. There's a whole set of things we need to do to achieve that. Fourth, very relevant for the counties across Virginia, is business operations centers of excellence, not just corporate headquarters, but also back office operations, onshore delivery centers, and so forth. And then finally, there's a whole set of disruptive technologies like unmanned systems, like genomics, like personalized medicine that individually may not be huge, but collectively will generate a lot of value. So there's a whole set of things that we need to do to cultivate those that are in our plan. And then finally, enhancing VDP's capabilities itself. For one of America's, in my view, America's premier state, we should have America's premier state economic development organization. And we've benchmarked everything that we do against other places around the country. In some places we are among the best, in some places we have a lot of room to grow and improve, and we've been focused on that. We've got to start marketing Virginia again. We have been able to restart that this year. We're excited about that. We need to expand our business development, our trade development programs, and we need to be a national leader in incentives administration. We cannot ever put our state leaders in a position again where they get embarrassed with how a particular incentive deal gets handled, and we've completely addressed that issue. Really grateful for the support of the General Assembly. 3 of those big priorities got support this year. The Custom Workforce Recruitment and Training Program that's going to be started to be implemented in the spring. We did not get a full-fledged marketing program, but we at least got funding for a basic marketing program for the Commonwealth. For the first year in several years, the Commonwealth of Virginia will have a larger marketing budget than the County of Fairfax, so we're pretty excited about that. I remember we were doing a study with the Port of Virginia, CBRE, and one of their draft recommendations was Virginia needs to stop focusing all of its marketing on Northern Virginia. And we said, oh, you're confused. That is Fairfax County. We actually don't have a marketing budget, so that's why you're seeing all the focus on Northern Virginia. So we're going to try to address that. And then finally, we got not enough to really address the whole issue, but we did get some support for expanding the site development program, and that's going to be our biggest priority in the upcoming session. We need to add a couple zeros to what the state's doing in this area, and I think there's a lot of energy and support for us to do that. We just need to lay out in detail what that would take. I wanted to briefly mention, before I stop, VDP and Go Virginia. This is a very important partnership to us. In particular, I guess the area that we're working on the most extensively is in site development, and both assessing our statewide site portfolio, but also working together to identify ways to close the gaps, some with Go Virginia dollars, some with other sources of state funds. The important thing for you to know is that we've been very clear about, what are the things that VDP owns versus what Go Virginia owns, and then there's a set of things that we collaborate on. So if we do all of that, and I certainly think we are capable of doing all that, these are the kinds of headlines we'll be looking at in a few years. So I'll stop there. Would love to respond to any questions or comments that you guys may have for me.
Virginia used to have a shell buildings program
Yes.
for low-cost financing. Is there any hope of that coming back?
Great question. We did, and although there were times when some of those buildings didn't get developed for a while, overall it did help create a lot of jobs and new tax revenues for localities. That is one of the specific ideas that we're looking at right now as an opportunity to bring that back. We think the gaps are a little bit more on site preparation, but there definitely is a need for more shell buildings as well. Go ahead. Yeah.
From the main conference, Governor Moret talked about small business.
Yes.
Well, a small business doesn't need a 100-acre site. You need a 5 to 10-acre site.
Right.
But your website doesn't currently offer an opportunity to accentuate, potentially build-ready, shovel-ready sites of 10, 15, 20 acres. Is that something else that could be expanded so that localities, and it's a lot of work,
Right.
but building on a 20-acre site, you were more likely to get something like that than a 200-acre site. And those could be prepared much cheaper, things like that.
Yeah, I think the website has a good number of those size sites. I think maybe what you're talking about is the Business Ready Sites program focuses on the bigger sites.
Yeah,
Joe, do you know, doesn't the site database go all the way down?
Yeah, the site database goes all the way down. The Business Ready Sites program was initially proposed by
250 and then went down to...
Yeah, 250, but
Yeah, so the database itself definitely goes all the way down. The issue of the database, it's on our website.
Above a certain
We
size.
let every local and regional EDO that wants to use it for free, and they can brand it as their own site. So it does go all the way down to those small sites. I think what you may be referring to is our Business Ready Sites program is focused on those that are 100 acres and above. We actually would like to bring that down somewhat. The reason that it's focused on the larger level is that, at least at the state level, there's actually a pretty nice inventory of smaller prepared sites. We're really missing out is on the, now it's not necessarily true in every locality, mind you, but statewide there's a pretty good inventory. And so where we really see the gaps in the projects that we're losing because of lack of prepared sites tend to be those kind of medium and larger size sites, like 100 acres, or at least 50 acres or bigger. Having said that, one of the recommendations that's out there is if the Commonwealth were willing to increase funding for site development, we could lower that threshold and help at least get down to maybe the 50 acre or 25 acre threshold to be able to develop some of those smaller sites.
You said, you talked about adding more zeros and keeping up with Go Virginia. You didn't talk about how will the money be made, how do we compete for that money? by region, or would you do it through Go Virginia? Or are you know, and I just, I'm from Lynchburg area, so we're focused on the training center,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
a large site.
Absolutely.
Well, how do you go for that money?
Well, first of all, we have to have money to go for. So yeah, exactly, after we have this years. So first of all, the work that the General Assembly leadership has asked us to do and that we're really focused on right now is completing a comprehensive assessment of the sites that we currently have. And what we realized quickly as we got into that a few months ago was that if you go to VDP's website today in the state site database, roughly 70% of the information that's needed isn't there. And of course, this is really populated at the primarily local level, some extent regional level. So we're pursuing a number of things right now to try to fill in all the missing data. We expect to have that done in January, or by January. And then once that's completed, we're going to essentially compare, if you look at our growth targets and how that would spread out across the different regional targets, where do we have sufficient capacity, where do we not? And our preliminary finding, which I think is going to stay the same, is that in general we have most of the sites that we need. They're just not prepared enough to be market ready. So, as you all know, a piece of dirt is not necessarily a prepared site. And so most of the work and most of the investment is going to be about taking the sites that have already been identified and getting them up to a higher tier level of preparedness. So I'm sorry, that's all about just getting to your question. So the point is, the first piece is really making the case for how big the gap is. And then what we've committed to do with our state leaders is to give them a range of options, because it could go all the way from, public-led, state-level investment, all the way to more of a kind of incentivized private sector-led approach, but with state incentives. So there's still a lot to be determined, candidly, in terms of both the structure and the level of funding available. But one thing I would assure you of is that our intent is to work very closely with Go Virginia and the Go Virginia Regional Councils, as well as the regional economic development organizations, to get alignment within each region on which sites are the priorities for that region, so that we'll have balance statewide and at the regional level. Now, we'll be biased a little bit more toward the regional level versus the locality level, just because you may have a great site in your locality, but if the one next door is better, it's probably going to win, right? So trying to find a way to balance those interests is going to be something that we're going to have to put a lot of energy into. But at a minimum, the intent is to have it be balanced at the regional level across the Commonwealth. I think we're a few months away from really having a fully fleshed out program that I can describe to you. I will say the one thing we've identified that we think is an absolute no-brainer is to complete characterization of all the sites in the database. I think at 25 acres or higher, and that's about a $2 million investment, which is huge ROI for that. But the level of investment needed to address the broader issue is, many, many, many millions. So we're trying to build a really clear case. This is not something we're going to solve overnight, but something that will be a core top 3 priority for VDP for the foreseeable future.
I'm an advocate of inter-municipality cooperation. If you have 2 counties, if one county is doing well and the other is not doing so well, a lot of times the county that's doing well wants to concentrate their efforts on continuing to do well, as opposed to considering working with another county next door that's not doing well. So what are some of the things that can be done to encourage these more successful counties to work with counties that are not as successful?
That's a great question, and I should have said, it kind of ties together something I should have said with the previous question, and that is that we definitely envision that a significant portion of the funding that would be provided to address this issue is likely to come from Go Virginia. I would guess at least a third or maybe even half. What I'm told is that every regional council had site preparation as one of their top 2 issues. And the reason I mention that is that at least as it's currently constructed, Go Virginia would only fund site development where multiple localities are partnering on a site. So that will create some opportunities to address the issue that you're talking about. The other thing I would say is that while obviously if you don't have a formalized agreement with another locality, you can't necessarily share property tax revenues, but As we all know, if a major new operation develops next door, you are going to pick up new population and retail spending and so forth as a result of that. But we're definitely open to other suggestions that are out there. One of the concerns that I have candidly right now is the greater burden we place on localities to put together these multiple locality structures. It seems like it's creating a friction, let's say, in terms of getting more of these things done. So what I'm personally hoping for is that there could also be a pathway that if all the localities in a region agree that a particular site is a strategic regional site for a particular sector, that alone could be enough for it to be considered regional nature, that it doesn't necessarily have to literally represent a sharing of direct sharing of revenues. But it could work either way, and obviously the General Assembly will have a significant role, will have the role, I should say, and how that ultimately gets resolved. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
You mentioned the falling state rankings and some of that being associated with the state and local taxes on relocating businesses. Of course, I assume that data primarily is based on statutory tax rates and ratios. Does it take into account, or has VDP ever done an analysis of state local incentives that mitigate those tax rates to see what the actual tax burden is for projects across the state?
Yeah, the study that I mentioned takes into account both the tax rates and tax types, as well as statewide available by right exemptions, credits, incentives, and so forth. It specifically does not take into account local variations. If something's only available in one locality, they typically would not consider that. And that's partly what's hurting us. And one of the points I made, a lot of localities have said, hey, we do deals all the time to address local property tax for a period of time or something of that nature. And I think that's great. But what's happening is that we're often not getting considered on the front end because of this sort of perception of Virginia's overall tax structure for new investment. So to the extent that we could have at least address some of the most extreme issues, I'll give you an example. Like for really capital-intensive manufacturing projects, like something that's at least $300 million. And by the way, in the entire Commonwealth, we might only get one or two of those in a whole year out of 133 localities. If we could say, hey, for something that's a very high capital investment, maybe the portion that's over some threshold has an automatic, reduction, across the Commonwealth. I realize that's maybe heresy, I can't think of the word, but something negative. For localities, but if you never get a project that's over $100 million, what are you risking if you have a reduction for just the portion that's over $100 million, not the first $100 million? That would make a huge difference to our ability to attract capital-intensive projects that for the most part, we're not attracting at all. I mean, literally almost zero in Virginia. That's a good example where I'm talking about where we could do something kind of surgical that doesn't place any risk at all on the current base or even the growth for 99% of the new activity. But for these really exceptional projects, for the most part, that Virginia is losing to other states, it would make us more competitive. That's an example. At the state level, what we're really missing is quality jobs incentives. A lot of states have like a payroll rebate or a quality jobs rebate that's a by right incentive for like manufacturing projects, for example, sometimes with a higher benefits for more distressed areas or more rural areas. Those two things would make a huge difference. With, in my view, zero negative impact, for the locality fiscal situation.
Stephen, maybe follow up that Joe Lurch with Vaco, and I want to thank Stephen because he came to us 2 summers ago, if you remember, with that ranking. Hey, we got to address this. And as we worked back and forth, what we found in the rankings that hopefully we're going to get fixed, thanks to you, is that they were basing that capital intensive on one tax rate, County of Roanoke. And they were basing it on their M&T, their statutory rate, when their effective rate was an order of magnitude 4 less. And so it's just an error. But I have to give VDP credit, and you can go on their website. They do, I think it's almost annual now, all the state and local tax, and they give by locality each of the M&T, not only the statutory rate, but the effective rate. And that's some of the stuff that we hope we can work on to get the message out.
That's right. We've really appreciated our partnership with Vaco. Now, this is what Joe's talking about. So when it was first published in 2015, in fact, in 2012 as well, the previous version, it showed us as having the second highest tax burden in the country. And when we dug into that, we found the issue that Joe, and actually you guys helped identify as well, and that impacted both the capital-intensive manufacturers and the labor-intensive. So it's definitely a better picture, but nevertheless, we would like to see some improvement of that. Again, these are just for the new or expansion projects, so there are some things we could do to be very surgical on what we're doing there.
Yeah, obviously, basically the slide that this decline or fall from whatever you want to call it has occurred over a period of time. I'm assuming that state leadership has been informed over this period of time that these things are going on. Why have we been so slow to react?
I've only been here just under 2 years in this role, but what I will tell you is that I honestly think most people didn't know. People would still say, somebody told me last week, Virginia's always ranked the best state for business, and I'd say, no, we're not in the top 3 in any of the rankings, I think part of it is there's so many great things about Virginia that we often, like to think of ourselves in a class by ourselves, and in a lot of ways that's true, but sometimes we sort of miss that it's not that things have gotten worse, it's that they've gotten better in some other places. But what I have found is that when we've shared these issues, they've been willing to act on them. So I mentioned these 3 things just in the last session. Those were kind of our top 3 issues that we said, hey, these will really make a difference in moving the needle on those rankings and also on the substance of how we do business in Virginia. And we're not yet where we want to be, but I definitely feel like there's a general recognition that this is important and that we need to take action to get there.
Well, just to follow up to that, the states that have leapfrogged ahead of us, apparently, Georgia and North Carolina, have they done things to create their positive results?
They absolutely.
Or have we, so we've just sat back and not done anything and let them leapfrog ahead of us?
Well, I wouldn't say anything, but let me just give you some examples, right? So, now this isn't the late, I wasn't able to update it for this year, but North Carolina, for example, a couple of years ago passed comprehensive business tax reform that dramatically lowered their corporate tax rate. Now, their actual tax burden didn't go down as much because a lot of it was they were eliminating exemptions, but they lowered their tax burden. When you look at business incentive programs, Virginia is not even on the map. We have by far the lowest incentives per job of any southern state. It's not even close in our competitive ranking. When you look at shovel-ready sites, we're not even on the radar versus states in some cases that are spending tens of millions of dollars a year. So some of it is that they have taken action in the last few years. Some of it is that it's not so much, I don't think we've really gotten worse. I couldn't see anything where Virginia actually got worse. It was more that we largely stayed where we were and other places were doing things that were enabling them to get into a better position.
Talked about shovel-ready sites. Our county is in partnership with Greenville County on one of the mega sites in Virginia. And Joe is here, chip in, Joe, because I know you're intimately involved with this, but one of the issues we've had is, we've attracted people to look at the site. Certainly workforce training is an issue. But one issue we had was the public gas utility said, when you get a customer, we'll talk about delivering gas. Well, that's not getting our site ready. And that was a real issue. And, we didn't get a Trampe.
Yeah, it's huge. When you think about site selection, the most important thing to think about when you think site selection is it's really primarily about site elimination. They're trying to get down to a small number of sites as quickly as they possibly can so they can focus their energy there. So if you have literally anything that suggests any level of risk or uncertainty related to infrastructure, the zoning, the ownership, the available, all those things, anything that puts it out of a high degree of confidence that within, let's say, 12 months you can get there, you're just immediately off the list. It doesn't matter how great the schools are, the business climate, everything else. That's a really tough issue. And again, they only publish the top 10. We don't know exactly where we stand, but we're not in the top 10. Who is? Number 1 is Tennessee, 2 Georgia, 3 South Carolina, 4 Alabama, North Carolina 6. We're way out of the pack on that. And mostly that's because the state, many of the localities have actually put significant dollars into this. The state in general has put very, very low, other than if you want to count the Tobacco Commission. Other than that, the state's put very, very little into this issue. And so we are saying, we need to play our part. You know, the localities certainly have a role to play, but the state needs to play a much bigger role in this than we have.
Well, and we're trying to get to that tier 4 that the state is asking,
Right,
and we're not quite there yet.
right. And that is the key level. I mean, if you're not tier 4, particularly for a large site, there's some other states that have those, right? So it's just going to be really easy to knock us out, particularly when they also know that the other state's going to offer a much bigger incentive package, you know, as well. So you put those two things together, it's not a good combination. Now, the custom workforce thing, we're definitely addressing. It's going to take us a year or so to get it fully up and running, but that we're going to check off. But we've still got some work to do on sites, and we still got some work to do, in particular, for the big competitive projects on our incentive packages.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about shovel-ready sites. I mean, you know, West County is a tremendous amount of money in Progress Park, and we have.
Great
sites,
site.
We have underacre sites, and we have all the infrastructure there. But over the past 10 years, nothing. I mean, you, through the IPA and stuff, and through Virginia, we're not seeing,
Right, and that's really where I would say, there's kind of like 4 or 5 big things. We've got to have robust marketing and lead generation, because if we don't get the look, you know, you don't even get there. We've got to have world-class workforce solutions, which we haven't had, we're about to have. We've got to have competitive incentives, and we've got to have prepared sites. So you have a great site. I mean, I've been there multiple times, you know, I think it's fantastic. We haven't had those other 3 elements that I think have been an obstacle for you. And look, the other thing is, make no mistake, on sites, you know, particularly at the locality level, right? You've got, you know, 1 or 2 or some small number of things that you know, are your focus, right? Even if we're doing everything right, some of those things are going to take a while to develop. I'll give you an example. The location where Alabama just won the Toyota Mazda project, they had put, I forget how much money, an enormous amount of money into that site starting more than a decade ago, right? It was literally, I think they started 15 years ago, but it was at least 10 years ago, and sat there, they showed it to different companies, and then all of a sudden it's the perfect, you know, site. So I don't want to imply that there's not going to be times when it just takes time to get there, but the point that I'm trying to make is all these things matter, and we should try to be competitive on all the things that matter that will ultimately impact, you know, our level of project activity.
Let me be the devil's advocate. Why would county spend money that which county is spending to develop a mega site and medium sites and nothing happened? We've got a tremendous money investment. We have all the utilities, we have transportation, we have rail. We haven't had anything built on that site in the last 10 years. So why should these new counties have any hope that a mega site will help them?
Is this you're talking about the Wythe County site?
Talking about Progress Park.
Forest Park. First of all, I hope I didn't leave anybody with the impression that I think every locality needs a mega site. I am not suggesting that at all. I do think that every region, as a region, certainly with localities participating, needs to think about what are the growth goals that we have and what are the sites that we need to have to meet those goals, considering what's realistic and what aligns well with each of those communities. Now, I think Progress Park is fantastic. That's been a little while. Second, yes, it is. I understand. But that, we can go to places, I can show you places in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Georgia, and Alabama that are also similarly prepared and also empty. But remember, it's not just, we have to get all of these different things right to maximize our chances of success, right? So in that particular case, I would say that you all have done what you needed to do at the local level, and the state wasn't doing its part at the level that it needed to do its part. What we're saying now is, I think that there's a growing acknowledgement among our General Assembly leadership that we need to do some things in a better way at the state level to help position our localities to succeed. So I hope nobody should take away from this, my comments, that this is all on you. In fact, when I look at this slide, this to me mostly talks about state issues that need to be addressed. I do think there are roles that the localities need to play, but it's not all on your shoulders. I think we've got to do our part as well. And in general, Virginia has had a very small, you know, economic development effort compared to the places that we're competing with.
So the next element is workforce development. You kind of glossed over the fact that there's going to be some program coming out from community colleges. In our regional community college, the for the last 3 to 5 years has been cutting CTE class after another for lack of attendance. And they just don't even offer the curriculum that we think we need. Could you go in a little bit more about what you're going to do with the community colleges?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that what I'm talking about doing doesn't address that issue in particular, but I think it's a very important issue, and that is that we've got to make sure that our funding for higher education aligns a little bit better with what the community, the business and industry really need. For example, we have roughly 30% of our graduates with a bachelor's degree or higher are not able to get college level jobs. I'm not talking about recent graduates, I'm talking about all the graduates, 30%. At the same time, we've got companies saying they can't get machinists, they can't get welders, they can't get CNC operators, all these different pieces, right? So just shift over that. So when you look at that set of priorities that we talked about, I think sometimes when we talk about higher education, it tends to get oversimplified to just say, well, we need higher attainment levels. We just need more people with a bachelor's degree or higher.
No.
And that's not, but some people do say that, but that's not necessarily the answer. So on your particular point about CTE, a lot of this area of focus needs to be at the community technical college level, focused on those particular areas that are the greatest need for business industry. Now, the particular program that I'm talking about is not intended to solve that entire problem, but it's intended to solve a very specific problem, and that is that if we have a highly competitive economic development project that's looking at multiple states and is very concerned about the availability of a skilled, talented, trained workforce, we will solve that issue for that employer. Very, very important issue to solve, but that's 1% of the problem. It's a very important 1%. Like for a place like Progress Park, they need us to be able to say, we'll deliver a world-class workforce better and faster than the other state in America. We'll put together teams of subject matter experts that will essentially recruit and screen talented employees, provide both pre-employment and post-employment training down to the position level, and do that at all, completely customized, all at no cost to those participating companies.
At the community college.
In partnership with the community college. There'll be some, the only reason we're going to be fully at the community college is that a huge part of what makes this successful is speed and customization. It's being able to say, if you tell us you're coming, we'll put together a team of 20 people that'll be on this right away. Well, most community colleges, they don't have people sitting around that can just do that. So we will leverage their facilities, we'll leverage their faculty and staff that are available, but largely we're talking about a statewide program that can bring to bear both full-time staff and contractors that are needed to deliver a world-class solution. If you look at where site consultants themselves, the people that choose basic or help advise where roughly half of all these projects go, they rate 2 states, number 1 and 2, every ranking, Georgia and Louisiana. They both have this model. I built one of them in Louisiana, largely modeled after Georgia, candidly. We're talking about doing something very similar with Virginia. But again, that's really just for the competitive economic development projects.
So I translate what you said, we're going to build a curriculum just for you if you bring your company.
Correct. That's
Who's
exactly
going to
right.
do that? BEDP?
That would
Or
be,
the local education department?
it will be a mix of full-time staff, full-time BDP staff, and that will be hired out of industry. That'll be, trained recruiters, trained developers, all that, plus contractors and community college staff. For in any particular project, if it's a really small project, it might be 5 people. For a huge project, it could literally be 100 people for a period of time. So we'll have, similar to what Georgia and Louisiana have done, we'll have a core team that will travel across the state where the needs are. As that program develops out, there'll be regional offices that will be based at community colleges. And every opportunity we get to fully leverage the community college staff, we will. Just bear in mind, again, the speed issue and the scale issue will limit often the extent to which a community college can realistically participate in the short term. Now, once they get ramped up, this program is purely in order to get them up to full speed. At that point, everything gets turned over to the community college and they really own it 100% after that. This is really about addressing that really, that high risk, really short-term critical period when they're trying to go from 0 to 500 people or whatever that number is. And we really have not had a good answer to that question for several years, whereas Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, typically all in the top 5, have had a materially better approach. It's not because they're doing things, they're working harder, they have better people. They have a structurally different approach to this problem, and we're going to essentially model what they've done that's worked well in Virginia. And VCCS is totally on board, and it's going to be a great partnership. That's going to kick off in the spring.
What about training in high school, CTE, where kids go right out and get a job in
No,
industry?
yeah, I'm with you 100%, but we've got to get folks more, there's just a tremendous bias in Virginia and in America that everybody needs to go to a four-year school and it's the only path. And, I don't think our guidance counselors there's not enough of them, and the ones that we do have, I don't think have the ability to focus enough on really giving a full range of options and helping folks really think about how to go from, their interests and their academic preparedness and their ambition and so forth to what the different options are available for them. And that really gets at, there's a lot of, I guess, wonky words up here, but part of it is we need to help folks understand what the options are that are available to them and help people understand the pathways to get, from point A to point B, and not bias it as if the only positive outcome is a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, just to follow up on the whole educational thing and just a question on high schools, why aren't you doing this same program in high schools as well? There are communities that are embracing the concept of CTE, but in the school systems are going to resist it in every way they can. And if there was something coming down from the state hierarchy, I think it would help us as local communities trying to encourage our local school systems to engage in CTE.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very valid point. It's a simple reason is that we can't get out of, we have a limited scope of what we're in the code sort of allowed to do, if you will, or what we're charged to do, and we're not charged to run the education system, right? So when I talk about this custom workforce program, I'm talking about a very narrowly targeted piece that's focused really just on economic development projects. Now, these other things, which certainly includes what you're talking about, we're more of an advisor or we can provide input, but it's not, we don't really have the ball, I guess is what I'm saying. And to do something like that would take real resources. So we would advocate for it, we support it. I think your idea is absolutely on target. It's just not something that we've been charged to do.
One thing you see in rural counties as you drive around is there's this landscape of abandoned strip malls. A lot of retail seems to be collapsing. I wonder if any thought has been given in these large sites that you're looking for. I drive by large sites all the time. There's
Right.
an empty Walmart.
Right.
I think as we go forward, there's going to be less and less brick and mortar in retail. Is anybody looking at perhaps converting some of these sites?
Yeah, we are. I mean, I think it's first of all, I think DHCD is doing some cool stuff in that area, and that's one of our great partners. Part of the reason that we think it's so important for every region to grow is that if you, and you all know this so well, if you face continued decline, you start losing assets, right? Like what's going on with rural retail is not just the internet, it's also that with the population goes down, there's just not as much demand. So one of the reasons we think it's so critical that the Commonwealth make an absolute commitment that every region grow at least a little bit is to maintain those critical assets, the hospitals, the schools, those retail amenities and so forth. Now, on your specific question, certainly sometimes those can be opportunities, but a lot of times if we're talking like say a manufacturing thing, or sometimes it just doesn't fit, based on what it is. So I definitely think that's something that's a great opportunity, but we haven't yet, I guess, cracked the nut in terms of like what is the thing we should be doing that we're not doing right now. But I do think DHCD is doing some things in that area that are worthwhile. I just don't have a good answer on that particular one.
It's a comment, not a question. I lived through a strike. I was the plant engineer, shut down 2 locations, merged into the Warren County. We went on to a 69-acre site. It was an old truck manufacturing plant. So we had to gut it and convert it into a bakery. Today they're doing somewhere between 90 and 100 million pounds of product. 2 hardest things were getting mechanics. Everybody's a mechanic. Until you give them a stinger and ask them to weld and what they do looks like this. No, I'm serious. It was a struggle to get. We were told you have a great source of employment. Couldn't get them through the drug test. If you're going to even manufacture a cracker for the military, for the MREs, you have to pass a drug test and a background check. There's truth and consequences. And we had 30 acres on the other side of the facility you could develop. We were sitting in a staff meeting. I suggested setting up another type of manufacturing because we had all the delivery ability, we had the pneumatics for the conveying, and they said no. It took us so long to get rolling, to get employees, but the biggest asset we found was Lower Fairfax Community College. They listened to us, and we went out to businesses and held meetings and helped them develop the programs that we needed. If you didn't go to Lower Fairfax, you didn't work for me. And I would let you have up to 2 hours a day for your schools to get the plant started. Because I needed welders, machinists, electricians. 4 of my electricians today are master electricians in the state. They have the certs. I have 2 that had HVAC certs. I'm retired and out of there now, but I keep in touch. When we tell someone we have a workforce, we have to make sure it's a ready workforce. And that's true to consequences, because it costs another facility. And the drug issue, till we solve that, anything that has to have security clearances, you're not going to be able to do. So we have to address multiple issues, not just this. But I would say go to Lower Fairfax, look at their models, talk to Jeannie Clark or Larry. Those people listened and worked with us. And they worked hard for 2 years. And the quality of people that came out of there were top shelf. Other than that, I looked for military. If you were a machinist in the Navy, I knew you could do close tolerances. If you were a Corps of Engineers person, I had quality people that could follow direction, understood how important it is, especially today, to log. You have to keep a running log of everything you do. My machinist had to zero out the calipers every day. I ran lead through the finishing rolls when you're making crackers so that I could be plus or minus a 10,000th on a dough sheet. We need to be able to say, yes, we have a workforce, but it's a ready workforce, and no, it's a safe workforce.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would say in general, part of my job is I sit on the State Higher Education Board, and one of the things that I try to advocate for is that we need a more balanced investment model that puts more emphasis on our community colleges. Because I really think that, I've got a doctorate, I believe in higher education, but I don't think everybody needs a bachelor's degree, and I think we're holding back the growth of our communities and holding back the futures of many of our young people by not helping them understand those full ranges of options and making sure that we fund those programs properly so that they can pursue those fields. I don't control it, but I'm going to keep advocating.
I call them the golden crafts, because people look down at the mechanics and the plumbers.
Right.
But people be in a world of trouble, flush that toilet. Those guys are where the way to go. You can go to a doctor and spend 200 hours for a visit, but complain because the mechanic charged you 45. Come on. There's something wrong with the perception.
I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, I actually wanted to kind of build on that because he's describing a business that was here that wanted to expand, as I understood it. And the governor this morning told the story about bringing Coopers here, so we're not sending our white oak overseas to have wine barrels made to bring them back. And a lot of what you're talking about seems to me it's sort of big game hunting. It's going after, and I know you said, and I appreciate that you talked about that, it's not just about a mega site for every locality. But could you talk about a little bit more about that balance, about what within your program, how you see helping existing businesses that are already here to grow?
Yeah, and first of all, I'm really glad you asked that question because I always have to be careful. When people think of VDP, they think of big game. But the funny thing is Virginia rarely attracts any big game. So if we're focused just on that, we're not doing a very good job. You know, if you look at our projects, like the last few years, our median project, our typical project, is a 50-job expansion of an existing company. That's most of what we're working on. Now, what I can't control is, you know, if Virginia gets in the finals for Amazon HQ2, that's what's going to be on the front page, not that 50-job expansion of that local manufacturer. Right? So part of this is a perception reality thing. I'll give you an example. Like for this program, I mentioned this custom workforce program. In Georgia, Louisiana, and we expect in Virginia, this will be 2/3 existing companies that are growing. So we're not just talking about recruiting new companies, it's also important expansion of existing firms. We don't have, in general, the way the code is set up, we don't have the ability at VDP to support really small projects, but the vast majority of what we're doing is more like kind of medium, like a 25 job, 50 job, 60 job expansion, or even a new company of that scale. So it's definitely more balanced than it looks from the headlines. The truth is we actually need more of the big projects. There's a lot of big projects that could go in these smaller metros and rural regions that we haven't been competitive for, and that could then support a whole range of other suppliers and so forth in the area. So we definitely believe in both. The other thing I'd say is we actually would like to put a lot more effort into business retention and expansion. The tension that we have is that a lot of our economic development partners at the local and regional level don't want us to put much investment there. They just want us to bring them leads, for new business. And so it's a constant kind of challenge. We would like to do both. We have, just to give an example, there's only about 2,500, there's 250,000 business establishments in Virginia, but just 1% of them are responsible for the majority of our entire employment in the state, including direct and indirect. But we actually don't visit them all every year. We really should, though, right? But it's kind of like a staff constraint. So what we're trying to build up and make the case for is recognizing that most of our growth is going to come from those existing firms. We'd like to have a much bigger business retention and expansion effort, but we've had a little trouble getting the support to grow there. So just understand it's perception is different than reality. We'd actually like to do a lot more of what you're talking about. We just need support from the GA to do it.
How many 25 firm companies do you think, or 25 employee companies know that they have this available?
Well, remember, this isn't available yet. We're launching it in the spring. So once we do launch it more, then we'll know. Now, to be clear, again, this is purely for budget reasons. It's going to be primarily focused on competitive projects. So this is definitely not, for the custom program itself will tend to be projects that are, at least 25 or 50 jobs, just because there's a lot of cost involved on a per, that can't get spread across multiple employees if it's much smaller than that. But mostly it's just a capacity, constraint issue. But if you were to go to our website today, I think it's pretty clear for folks what the eligibility is at different levels. The way Virginia is set up, the really small projects are more at like the Small Business Finance Authority, the Small Business, I forget SBSD, I think it's called, and other entities. So part of it's we just don't have the programs at BDP, but we would like to do more of that. We just need support to be able to do it.
We have a really absence of skilled electricians. Data centers in Boynton, we have data centers in Rankin County, we have data centers in Ashburn, we have a fab going in Manassas that you're aware of. There are more people getting out of the trade than are getting in. And the need for them is going up exponentially. We have a manufacturer of electrical components that supports these facilities in our county. And we would like to support them. But the only funding available is to Go Virginia requires multiple jurisdictions. We're a very large county, mile-wise. And you're looking at a 35-minute bus ride from any locality to anything that we want to do. So that's kind of poo-pooed a lot of opportunity for us to go, all right, Go Virginia, great, requires 2 localities, not an option for us. So we can't really pursue that, and we can't really fund it by ourselves. Be aware this is an issue. But it's, again, we want them to expand. They are expanding. They will expand more. They will bring other vendors to our county. They're a leader in what they do right now.
I'm with you 100%. One thing everybody should be aware of, if you're not, is that in Virginia, which like in most states, we don't really fund our higher education institutions based on the cost of what they're providing, right? So part of the reason that we're not meeting these needs is that, for example, these skilled trade programs we talked about earlier, they cost more than it costs to deliver an English class or a liberal arts class. But we don't really recognize that in the way that we fund things. So in some ways, our institutions are literally disincentivized to meet the demands of the marketplace. This is a structural problem, and it's not just Virginia, it's other states too, but we ought to be doing more to address that. I think the Fast Forward program, I think, addresses that a little bit, but we think it needs to be done in a more extensive way, because it really gets at that exact issue that you're talking about. Joe, you got a question?
Well, yeah, I just have a couple comments real quick, Stephen. One, to give everybody an idea of what we're dealing with from a site readiness perspective, there are roughly 966 25-plus acre sites in the database. There are about 100-plus acre sites. We had our big aha moment in 2013 when we had an opportunity to land Caterpillar, $160 million investment, 1,600 jobs. It ended up going down to Georgia, over $2 billion regional impact. So that was what set the metric for the 100-plus acre sites. The other thing I want to do is I want to commend Stephen. Stephen came in, took our BDP after a JLARC review, and the organization went through a lot of organizational changes, and he hit the ground running, and it's kind of like running a marathon with a 100-pound rucksack on when you've gone through a JLARC review. And Stephen has been one of the most engaged, energetic executive directors we've had at BDP since I've been working in the state for 20-plus years. So I would like for everybody to recognize that he's doing a lot of hard work.
Thank you, Chair. Liz?
I can't follow Joe, but I do have one compliment and one question. The compliment is VDP has developed, through your leadership here with Christie, you've developed a communication mechanism back to every economic developer. And if you as local government leaders are not aware of this, your economic developers get a quarterly report of VDP's performance against its own goals and how it impacts you as a locality. Those are really good numbers to help you think about what your own local strategy should be. So you ought to be talking to your economic developer about that. Question for you, you've said a lot about success in Virginia will depend on regional improvements, regional success, growth in each region. Are there metrics by which you're benchmarking each region? And if so, are those public that we could understand what you're looking at to benchmark regional success?
No, that's a great question, Liz. We're looking at that in a few different ways, but I would say primarily we're looking at employment growth at the regional level, growth in median earned income, which is kind of a reflection of job quality at the regional level. We're also looking at leads, VDP-generated leads at the regional level, and then project announcements, both the number of announcements as well as the capital investment in jobs. And the report that Liz is talking about actually was one of the things that partly came out of the JLARC report, partly came out of feedback from our partners of wanting more transparency. And to the best of my knowledge, that report that we provide is the most transparent in the country in terms of not just sharing what our totals are statewide, but how those totals break out by region across the Commonwealth of Virginia and how that compares in jobs, leads, capital investment. It's got the sites portfolio and various other things in there. And I think it's really helped folks to better understand, how they're doing and how the state's efforts impact them and how it is balanced across the Commonwealth. The other thing we're doing with our board is showing them that, look, let's not just say if we had a great year because we won, one huge project or we had a bunch of big projects. How did each of our regions do? And if we have regions that are in negative territory, even if the Commonwealth as a whole is doing well, we're not going to view that as a wholly successful year. I think ultimately that's going to result in, or candidly, it already has resulted in significant changes. Because at least as I'm told by many of our partners across the state, before the JLARC thing and all that, there tended to be perhaps an over-focus on the Golden Crescent, if you will. And of course, because of its size, it will always have the majority of the projects. But we're really working hard to try to serve every region of Virginia. And we've got more work to do. I'm not saying by any means, mission accomplished, but I think we're making some good progress in that respect.
Steve, we probably have time for one more question. But before that, just to remind everybody, we've got the evaluation sheets, these green sheets. If they're wasn't in your seat, they're right here. You can fill them out on your way out, or we'll have a box up at the registration desk.
Well, I really like what you have to say, and I'm excited about it, but here is the political will of the General Assembly to, this is going to be an investment of funding, so if they set you up to get all this information, how are you going to then bring them on board with the funding?
Sure. Well, we just had Senator Ruff walked in a few minutes ago. But Senator actually said this before you walked in the room, but what we found was that once we shared all this, that there really was, I think, a recognition of it. And, these things are good examples. Just in the last session, 3 significant things that got funded. I think what probably the most accurate, take or maybe not most accurate, but one of the comments that I got was when Christy Morton and I met with Chris Jones, the chairman of House Appropriations, and he said, well, we can't double your budget in 1 year. I said, okay. But there was a recognition that these are real things that we need to address. And I think one of my sense is that they recognize these competitiveness issues, but I think they're also saying, hey, we want to make sure that we're seeing the results along the way, right? So we're not, and the truth is we couldn't implement all this in a year anyway. So we're looking at this as, we want to be aggressive, but this is going to be multiple years. And as long as we're making steady, significant progress every year, their support is going to grow, the impact is going to grow, and I think we're all going to get to where we want to go. So, would I like to go faster? Sure. But I think considering there are other challenges and other issues that need to be addressed, we're really delighted, sincerely, with the support we're getting. Thank you all very much. It's great to be with you today.